Previously on Legends of Aelos, we return to Rowan and Arel as they stand at a cross-section within the aqueducts beneath the rings, listening to the sounds of an encroaching horde approaching them from the darkness. With little time to act, Rowan attempts to secure the gate between them and the horde by bending a bolt through the gate where a lock would typically go. But as Rowan is attempting to bend the bolt with enough force to secure the gate, they hear heavy, plodding footsteps approach from behind, and a tall man in a top hat steps in. He replaces the bolt with a large rod, which he then proceeds to bend into secure enough fashion to hold the horde back, for now. Rowan and Arel proceed to introduce themselves to the strange fellow, whom returns the courtesy as he identifies himself as Mr. Peter Silence. Mr. Silence conveys himself as a confident and driven individual, though as conversation progresses, Rowan and Arel find it difficult to determine just where he aligns, as he seems to be driven by his own ambitions, and despite his prior actions, his professions are alluding to a faded grandeur for himself, implying that any allegiances with him are with him and his vision of ascension, even if ultimately at the cost of cities' inhabitants. His logic hinges on a prophecy that he will become the king of all Telvernia, or perhaps even Aelos, the crux of his argument hinging upon an old prophetical saying and a very specific line which happens to be omitted from proper texts containing this prophecy. As the conversation continues, it becomes more and more apparent that Mr. Silence's motivations are not to be swayed, and that his goals may not be as aligned with Rowan and Arel's goals as initially anticipated. Elsewhere, the remainder of the party is still outside of Amansar's, Dominicus standing in the doorway monitoring Amansar before he ventures to Karun to report his observations. He conveys that Amansar has been taking small portions of his concoction and administering it to an urn of unknown contents. Karun theorizes potential methods that Amansar could be employing, nefarious or otherwise, but cannot concretely say what it is he is attempting or performing. Lacking sufficient enough evidence, Karun advises his friend to maintain his diligence and to note anything else that might come off as suspicious. Amansar wraps up for the evening and he starts to retire. As guards who have been lighting the lamplights approach the party, they inquire as to why they are outside and not indoors. And fortunately, between Asher's statements of guarding the establishment and Amansar not outing them as the perpetrators of the door having been kicked in the first place, the guards leave the group with a simple word to remain cautious and safe. Somehow, amongst all this, Ace provides to be a particularly deft barbarian and pickpockets a small vial of what Amansar had been working with off of him. As he is bidding Amansar good night, Dominicus presents the vial to Karun and relays that Amansar had been applying this to the urn and literally listening for some sort of result or effect. Karun is able to identify the substance appears to be a potion of preserved life, but he cannot discern what its purpose might be in finding a cure, not without more information. After returning the vial, or at least making it look as though it wasn't pilfered, the group settles down to rest for the evening. Unfortunately, those currently under the affliction do not have a restful sleep, and awaken exhausted as the cursed disease continues to ravage their bodies, not to mention those also dealing with the spore exposure from underneath the apothecary's establishment. Asher heads off to inform his wife and the others back at the tavern of current developments, though is warned to keep an eye out for Vildriel and his Neramine companions. He makes it back, but is concerned that something might have happened during the party's absence. While this turns out to be true, fortunately what transpired is that Vildriel and his cohorts discovered they were no match for Siora, who now has a lot of them bound and gagged within the main room of the tavern. Though some, such as Zagia, are flustered, Asher is relieved to discover that his wife and the others remain unharmed, thanks yet again to the skill and prowess of one of Briar's parents. Coming back to when Arel and Rowan are conversing with Mr. Silence, the discourse grows more tense, as Rowan and Peter clash in position and opinion. Rowan standing his ground firmly, whilst still trying to sway, disarm, even potentially convince Mr. Silence that his motivations are selfish. Alas, Rowan is firmly driven to attempt to resolve the situation at hand and save the city, while Peter Silence is equally driven to build his kingdom upon the ashes of what once was. And so, Rowan leaves him and his croonies to see what Arel and he might still be able to accomplish without their aid. As the two continue on towards the exit to the surface, they hear the quiet echo of a distant bell, as if ringing to toll the calamity encroaching upon the rings. When the two breach the surface from the aqueducts, they find themselves in a bathhouse and are able to secure clothing less telling from whence they came. They make their way to the Order of Heroes to seek their aid in rescuing the town, as well as their friends. If not particularly warmly, Rowan and Arel are in fact welcomed into the Order's establishment, though garnishing appropriate attention proves to be difficult at first. Rowan's stern insistence does secure the ear of a female elf that holds some authority, and Rowan informs them of what they had more recently discovered after having spoken with Amansar. The elf, Ida, also informs Rowan of what had happened to Amansar, and how he lost his daughter, which could align Amansar still seeking only his own goals. Unsuspectingly to both Rowan and Arel, Aiden Nystirian himself actually makes a presentation, and not only does he present himself, he comes over and introduces himself to both Rowan and Arel. Now, the two of them speaking with the head of the Order himself, Rowan conveys what information he has again, and Aiden relays that they have dedicated much resource to research and discovery towards the plague, both in medicine and arcana. But he still gives gratitude to whatever information that Rowan can provide. Before leaving, they inform them of Mr. Silence and his motivations, before they set off to inform the rest of the town guard as well. Not long after, the two happen upon a suspicious guard breaking a lock and attempting to scale the walls away whilst discarding the guard uniform he was wearing. Rowan and Arel subdue him and attempt to interrogate. But then, suddenly, another bell tolls, not high and quiet, but deep and loud, almost as if a cathedral bell. And not moments after this, the infected are almost upon the group from the gateway that the imposter guard had unlocked. Rowan quickly is able to fashion the imposter's belt into a tie-off to keep the gate shut, but Rowan and Arel still must flee, as one of the infected intelligently reaches through the gate and proceeds to undo the knot. Back at the apothecary, time is apparently growing short for Karun and Dominicus, and they plead with Amansar that they assist. Tempers flare, and Karun even offers himself to be a test subject, provided it speeds the process to a cure. However, a commotion is noticed taking place over by the portcullis separating the hands from the rings. Briar, from her high-top perch, observes people racing towards the closed gate. Not infected people, but frantic nonetheless. As she approaches, she observes another group behind the first, more frantic, more erratic, decidedly more infected. Upon realizing that this second group are in fact infected, Briar struggles to determine what she can do to assist as she realizes that she cannot open the gate lest she put everyone on this side at risk. Dominicus arrives as a woman on the other side proceeds to extend her baby through one of the holes in the portcullis and pleads that they take her child. Briar, realizing that she can do just a bit more, grabs the child and then casts Levitate. She directs the woman to pretend as if she is scaling up the side of the gate. Eventually, she makes it to the top and is rescued by a guard on the parapet as the last of the doomed individuals succumb to the onslaught of the infected. Once it is only the plague-ridden that remain on the other side of the gate, the infected reach out towards Briar, Dominicus, and the others on the opposing side, snarling, gnashing, pleading for the others to help them as they claw at their potential next victims. And it is from here we shall continue the story of the Legends of Aelos.